I have always believed that Christmas reveals the truth about a family, not the polished postcard version with matching sweaters and staged smiles, but the quiet truths that slip between candlelight and carved turkey. The things people think you don't notice. This year I wanted everything to be perfect. I woke before sunrise, as I always do on Christmas morning. The house was silent, wrapped in that soft winter stillness that feels almost sacred. Snow had fallen overnight, blanketing the front yard in white. The oak tree outside the window wore a coat of frost, its branches delicate and brittle like spun glass. For a moment I just stood there with my coffee, staring at it, peaceful, beautiful, still. I told myself that this year would be different, that the distance I'd been feeling from Daniel was just stress, just adulthood, just life. My son had always loved Christmas. When he was little, he used to wake me at 5 in the morning, jumping onto my bed with wild curls and breath that smelled like toothpaste and excitement. He would shake me and whisper loudly, "Mom, Santa came." I heard him. Even after his father died, even after the house became quieter and grief settled into the walls like old dust, Daniel kept that spark alive. He would help me decorate the tree. He insisted on real lights, not the artificial ones. They feel warmer, he used to say. So this year I made everything exactly the way he liked it. The tree stood tall in the living room, wrapped in golden lights and red satin ribbon. I hung the handmade ornaments he made in elementary school, crooked clay stars and a reindeer missing one antler. I baked his favorite pecan pie from scratch, even though my hands ache more than they used to. The turkey went into the oven at noon. I basted it every half hour. The smell filled the house, rosemary, butter, garlic, warm and heavy and comforting. Christmas music played softly from the old radio in the kitchen. Nat King Cole, Bing Crosby, songs that felt like memories. I set the dining table carefully, 2 plates, 2 wine glasses, the good silverware, the cloth napkins embroidered with tiny holly leaves. It had been just the 2 of us for years now. No more big gatherings, no more cousins or noise, just mother and son. And that was enough, at least I thought it was. Daniel arrived at 6:17 p.m., late, not terribly late, but late enough that I had already checked the window 3 times and reheated the gravy twice. When I opened the door, the cold rushed in around him. He looked handsome, older, sharper around the jaw. His coat was expensive, more expensive than I remembered him owning. His hair was perfectly styled. But his eyes didn't match his smile. "Merry Christmas, Mom," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. His lips were cold. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." I replied, holding on to him a second longer than usual. He gently pulled away. That was the first thing I noticed. He used to hug back. We sat at the table, and I poured the wine, a bottle I'd been saving for months. Deep red, rich, special. He complimented the food, said it smelled amazing, but he barely ate. He checked his phone 3 times in the first 10 minutes. He laughed at the wrong moments during conversation. He seemed distracted, nervous. "You okay?" I asked lightly, slicing the turkey. "Yeah," he said too quickly. "Just work stuff. It's Christmas," I said with a soft smile. "Work can wait." "Yeah," he repeated, but he didn't put the phone away. I watched him the way mothers do without staring, the slight tapping of his fingers against the table, the way he avoided holding eye contact for too long, the faint crease between his brows. Something was weighing on him. I tried to ignore the small tightening in my chest. Instead, I told stories about the neighbor's new dog, about the church choir, about how the grocery store ran out of cranberries and I had to drive across town. He nodded, smiled, drank his wine, but he wasn't present. And then I noticed something else. Every time his gaze drifted, it landed on my glass. Not his, mine. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was looking for problems where there were none. But the 4th time it happened, I felt it. That quiet instinct. The one that kept me awake when he had a fever at age 7. The one that made me call him the night. He crashed his car in college. 5 minutes before he told me. A mother knows I forgot the pie, I said suddenly, standing up. His shoulders tensed. It's in the kitchen. Oh, he replied. Okay, I walked toward the doorway but didn't fully enter the kitchen. Instead, I paused just beyond the frame, where the light from the dining room cast shadows long across the wall. And I watched him through the reflection in the hallway mirror. He looked toward the kitchen, waited. Listened, then, slowly, he reached into his coat pocket. My heart didn't stop. It didn't race. It just changed. He pulled out a small glass vial, clear, unlabeled. His hand trembled just slightly. He unscrewed the cap and poured its contents into my wine glass. Not his, mine. The liquid blended instantly with the dark red. He stirred it gently with his finger, then quickly wiped his hand on his napkin. My body felt cold, but my mind was crystal clear. 32 years. 32 years of scraped knees, parent-teacher meetings, late, night talks about broken hearts. And here he was, poisoning my drink. I could have gasped. I could have stormed in. I could have shouted his name and demanded an explanation. But I didn't. Instead, I lifted the pie dish and walked back into the dining room with the same warm smile I'd practiced in the mirror that morning. Found it, I said cheerfully. He startled slightly but covered it quickly. Smells amazing, Mom. I set the pie down. Sat back in my chair and looked at my son, really looked at him. There was sweat at his temple. His fingers gripped the edge of the table too tightly. Fear, not hatred, not cruelty. Fear, and that was worse, because fear meant desperation. I reached for the wine bottle. Oh, I said lightly, I forgot to refill our glasses. Before he could react, I picked up his glass. Then mine, and with the smoothest motion I have ever made in my life, I switched them. Right there. Between us, he didn't notice. He was too busy staring at the pie. Or maybe he was staring at his own guilt. I poured just a splash more into each glass, enough to make it seem natural. Then I raised mine. To family, I said softly. He hesitated only a second before lifting his. To family. We clinked glasses. The sound was delicate. Almost beautiful, he drank. I brought mine to my lips and only pretended. Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside, Christmas lights glowed warmly against the walls. Everything looked perfect, absolutely perfect. And that was the moment I knew Christmas was about to reveal the truth. For a moment after he drank, nothing happened. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Bing Crosby crooned about a white Christmas. Snow pressed gently against the window panes like a silent witness. Daniel set his glass down. I watched his throat move as he swallowed. 1 second, 2, 5. He cleared his throat. That's strong. I smiled faintly. It's a bold year. He nodded, but his eyes flickered downward to the glass. Not casually, carefully, like a man checking whether a fuse had been lit. He picked up his fork and stabbed at the turkey, but his hand wasn't steady anymore. The fork scraped loudly against the plate. Mom, he said after a moment, forcing a small laugh, you ever think about downsizing? This house is a lot for one person. There it was. The real conversation trying to break through. I manage. I replied evenly. It holds memories. Memories don't pay property taxes. His tone was too sharp, too rehearsed. I tilted my head slightly. Is that what this is about tonight? He opened his mouth to answer, then paused. His expression shifted, subtle at first, a blink that lingered too long, a swallow that seemed harder. His fingers pressed against the edge of the table as though steadying himself. You okay? I asked gently. He inhaled slowly. Yeah, He stopped. His brows pulled together. The color in his face began to drain, starting from his lips outward like frost spreading across glass. My heartbeat remained steady, but something inside me tightened. Daniel. He blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear his vision. That's weird. What is? I feel warm. His hand rose to his collar. He tugged at it. His breathing changed, not fast, not panicked yet, just shallow. The medication was working. He shifted in his seat. The chair legs scraped harshly against the floor. He swallowed again. I don't feel right. Silence filled the room, heavy and unavoidable, the Christmas lights reflected in his glassy eyes. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and in that look I saw the moment realization struck. His gaze dropped to the wine glass. Then slowly, almost mechanically, it moved to mine, untouched, still nearly full. His pupils widened. "Mom," his voice cracked, "did you?" I folded my hands neatly on the table. "Switch our glasses." I finished calmly. The room seemed to tilt for him. "You saw." His words came out hoarse. "Yes." The single word hung between us like a blade. He pushed back from the table too quickly. The chair toppled over with a loud crash that shattered the soft holiday music. "I didn't, I mean." His legs wobbled. He reached for the table but missed, his palm sliding across the polished wood. Panic ignited in his eyes now. Not guilt, not anger. Pure animal panic. "What did you put in my wine, Daniel?" I asked, my voice steady but low. His mouth opened and closed like he couldn't catch air. "It wasn't supposed to," he stammered. "It wasn't supposed to hurt you." The words slammed into my chest harder than any scream could have. He staggered back a step, then another, until his knees hit the fallen chair. He collapsed awkwardly, gripping his stomach, though there was no pain there, only dizziness. "It was just to make you sleep," he blurted out. "Just sleep." My heart cracked, not loudly, but deeply. "Sleep," I repeated softly. "I just needed a few hours." He rushed on, his speech slurring slightly as the sedative spread through his bloodstream. "There are documents. I needed you to sign them, or at least make it look like you did." His head drooped forward, then jerked back up as he fought to stay conscious. "You are going to forge my signature?" Tears spilled down his face now, hot and desperate. I didn't know what else to do. The confession filled the house, louder than any choir. I stood slowly. He flinched. I hadn't realized until that moment that he was afraid of me, not physically. But morally, he knew what he had done. "What were the documents?" I asked quietly. He shook his head weakly. "Power of attorney temporary. I just needed access to the house, to the equity." "For what?" He squeezed his eyes shut. "I owe money." There it was, the truth, stripped bare. "How much?" "Too much," he whispered. His body swayed again. "You could have asked me." "I tried," he cried, though it came out broken. "You always say no when I bring up selling the house." "Selling the house," I said slowly, "is different from drugging your mother." The words were calm. That was what unsettled him most. He began to shake, not violently, but helplessly. The sedative was pulling him under, wave by wave. "I didn't want to hurt you," he murmured, tears dripping onto the floor. I ran out of time. I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up the small vial he had dropped earlier. The label was partially scratched off, but I could still make out the name of a strong prescription, sleeping pill. Not lethal, but powerful, enough to render someone unconscious for hours, long enough to sign away a lifetime. I returned to the dining room and crouched a few feet in front of him. "Look at me, Daniel." It took effort, but he lifted his head. When our eyes met, I saw it clearly now. He hadn't wanted me dead. He had wanted me powerless, and somehow that hurt more. "Do you know what hurts the most?" I asked softly. He shook his head faintly. "It's not the vial, it's not the wine, it's not even the lies." I paused, letting the silence press into him. "It's that you thought I wouldn't notice." His face crumpled. A mother who can tell when her child has a fever from one touch. I continued, my voice trembling now despite my control. "And you believed she wouldn't see you poison her glass." A broken sound escaped him, something between a sob and a gasp. "I was desperate," he whispered. "Yes," I said, "you were." His body slumped further. His eyelids drooped heavily. The medication was close to pulling him fully under. "I'm sorry," he breathed. I studied him there on the floor, 32 years old, yet suddenly looking like the little boy who once hid behind my legs on his first day of kindergarten. Desperation had twisted him, fear had guided him, but the choice had been his. I stood up and walked to the phone. For a moment, my hand hovered above it. Police, ambulance, or neither. Behind me, I heard his weak voice again. "Mom, please." I closed my eyes. Christmas lights flickered softly against the walls. The house still smelled like rosemary and pie. It would have been so easy to let anger take control, so easy to make this a night that destroyed him completely. Instead, I dialed emergency services. My son accidentally mixed medication with alcohol. I said calmly when they answered, "He's drowsy and disoriented." It wasn't the full truth, but it wasn't a lie either. As I hung up, I looked back at him. He was barely conscious now. The unraveling wasn't just his plan falling apart. It was the illusion I had carried for years, that love alone was enough to keep someone from falling. Tonight had proven something else. Love doesn't prevent betrayal. It simply gives it the power to wound deeper. And as the distant sound of sirens began to approach through the snowy night, I realized something with chilling clarity. This Christmas wasn't ending. It was beginning. The hospital room was too bright for December. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, sterile and unforgiving. They washed the color out of everything: the walls, the sheets, even Daniel's face. Machines beeped steadily beside him, tracking his heart rate as if it were something fragile and borrowed. He looked smaller in that bed, not physically, but emotionally. The sharp confidence he had walked into my house with on Christmas evening had evaporated. In its place was a hollow, doubt version of my son, pale, exhausted, exposed. The doctor assured me it was only a strong sedative mixed with alcohol. Dehydration, disorientation. He would recover fully. Recover. Such a simple word. As if healing the body automatically repaired the soul. I sat in the stiff, plastic chair beside him, while snow continued to fall outside the hospital window. I hadn't gone home. I hadn't eaten. The scent of rosemary and turkey still clung faintly to my sweater. A cruel reminder of how the evening had begun. After a few hours, Daniel stirred. His eyelids fluttered open slowly, and confusion crossed his face before memory crashed into him all at once. I saw it happen. Recognition, shame, fear. "Mom," his voice was raw. "I'm here," I said quietly. He swallowed, then winced slightly. "You stayed. I'm your mother." The words were simple, but they carried 2 years behind them. He turned his head away from me. "You should hate me." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I studied the profile of his face, the same nose he'd had since birth, the same faint scar near his eyebrow from when he fell off his bike at 9 years old. I remembered running barefoot down the street when the neighbor carried him home bleeding. I remembered holding a towel to his head while he cried into my shoulder. Back then, I had been his safety. Somewhere along the way, I had become his obstacle. "I don't hate you," I said finally. He let out a shaky breath that sounded almost like a sob. "You should." There was a long silence between us, thick with everything unspoken. "Who are you in debt to?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "Daniel." He closed his eyes. "It started small, just some investments. A friend from work said he had a system. Crypto, sports betting, short-term gains. I made money at first. And then I didn't." His fingers twisted in the hospital blanket. I thought I could fix it, win it back, double down, but every loss made it worse. "How much?" I asked again, softer this time. He hesitated. 80,000. The number settled heavily into the room. "And the expensive coat," I added quietly. His face flushed with humiliation, least to look successful. I needed people to believe I was doing well. I closed my eyes briefly. All those dinners he'd skipped, all those short phone calls, the distance, the distraction. He hadn't been drifting away from me. He had been sinking. They threatened me. He whispered suddenly. My eyes opened. "Who?" "The people I borrowed from to cover the losses. Not banks, private lenders." His voice trembled. "They said if I didn't pay soon, they'd come after what I had." "And what do you have, Daniel?" I asked. His eyes filled with tears. "You," he said. The word pierced deeper than anything else that night. "They knew about the house. he continued. I mentioned it once, just once. They said I was sitting on equity, that if something happened, if ownership changed, he couldn't finish the sentence. The betrayal wasn't just that he drugged my wine. It was that he had spoken about me like an asset. Like collateral, I wasn't going to kill you, he said quickly, turning toward me. I swear. It was just supposed to be temporary. You'd wake up confused. I'd say you signed things the night before. I'd fix everything before you even realized. You are going to rewrite my reality, I said, his mouth shut. The truth of it seemed to strike him for the first time. I stood and walked toward the window. Snowflakes drifted down lazily outside, soft and innocent. The world looked peaceful, untouched by greed or desperation. I raised you to ask for help, I said quietly. I was ashamed, so instead you chose deception. His silence confirmed it. I turned back to him. Do you know what betrayal really is? I asked. He shook his head faintly. It isn't anger. It isn't even harm. I stepped closer to the bed. It's the decision to use someone who loves you. Tears slid down his temples into his hair. I felt trapped. He whispered. Every day I woke up with this weight on my chest. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just kept seeing numbers, deadlines, threats. And you looked at me. I said softly and saw a solution. He covered his face with his hands. I'm disgusting. No, I said firmly. He looked up, startled. You are responsible. I continued. There's a difference. He stared at me, confusion mixing with grief. You made a terrible choice, but you are not beyond redemption. My voice grew steadier with each word. But understand this, what you did broke something. His breathing hitched, not just trust. I added, something deeper, the illusion that my son would never see me as a means to an end. I don't see you that way. He insisted desperately. You did, I said gently. On Christmas night, you did. The truth hung there between us, undeniable. A nurse briefly entered to check his vitals, then left again, sensing the weight in the room. After the door closed, Daniel spoke again, quieter now. I kept telling myself you'd never know, that it was harmless, that once my debts were paid, I'd fix everything. I'd be a better son. I'd take care of you when you got older. I almost smiled at the tragic irony. You tried to secure your future. I said, by gambling mine. He flinched. And yet, I continued, my voice softening, you drank the glass without question. He frowned slightly, not understanding. You were so certain I wouldn't notice that you never imagined I might act. His eyes widened slowly. The moment you realized, I said, that was the moment you felt what I felt. Fear, powerlessness. Betrayal, he began to cry again, but this time it was quieter. Not panicked, not frantic, just grief. I don't deserve you, he whispered. I considered that, deserve. Love isn't about deserving. It never was. I am not your reward, I said gently, and I am not your punishment. He looked at me, searching my face. I am your mother, I said, and that means I will not abandon you, but it also means I will not protect you from the consequences of your choices. His brow furrowed slightly. What does that mean? It means, I replied, that we are going to untangle this mess the right way, legally, transparently, with professionals. His expression shifted, fear creeping back in. You're not calling the police, should I? I asked calmly. No. His pulse quickened on the monitor. I held his gaze for a long moment, then don't ever put me in a position where I have to. The beeping steadied again. I already contacted a financial attorney, I added quietly, 2 weeks ago. His head snapped toward me. You knew? I knew something was wrong. I corrected, not this, but enough. The realization that I had been aware of his spiral before Christmas seemed to crush him further. I was going to help you, I said. You just didn't trust me enough to let me. Silence settled again. Not hostile, just heavy. Why didn't you tell me you paid some of it already? He asked weakly. Because I wanted to hear the truth from you first. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. Betrayal had brought us here, but truth, painful and exposed, was now sitting between us, fragile. Uncertain, still possible. As visiting hours ended and I gathered my coat, Daniel reached out weakly and caught my hand. "Mom, yes, are we going to be okay? The question wasn't about money, it wasn't about debt, it was about us." I looked at him, really looked at him. Not the desperate man from Christmas dinner, not the little boy from years ago, but the flawed human in front of me. "We are going to be different," I said honestly. His grip tightened slightly. "And different," I continued, "can still be okay." Outside, the snow had stopped, but the ground remained covered, a reminder that even the softest storms leave their mark. Christmas had revealed the betrayal. Now we would have to live with it and decide what came next. People think revenge is loud. They imagine shattered glass, screaming, police sirens, courtrooms, disownment. But the sweetest revenge I have ever known was quiet. It began 3 weeks after Christmas. Daniel had been discharged from the hospital. The sedative left his system quickly, but the shame did not. He moved back into his apartment, though he called me every evening, not out of habit, but obligation. His voice was softer now, measured, careful. Guilt will do that to a person. I told him I wanted him to come over one Sunday afternoon. No holiday, no candles, no music, just daylight and honesty. When he arrived, he looked tired, not physically, spiritually. We sat at the same dining table, the same one where everything had changed, but this time there was no wine. Only tea. I spoke with the financial attorney. I began calmly. He nodded. "I've been going to the counseling sessions you recommended." "I know," I said. "They've confirmed your attendance." His eyes flickered up. "You're checking." "Yes." There was no apology in my tone. He swallowed. "That's fair." I folded my hands in front of me. "I paid off the private lenders," I said. "In full?" His shoulders stiffened. "You what?" "I liquidated part of my retirement account." "Mom, no, don't confuse this with forgiveness," I interrupted gently. "This is containment." He went quiet. "I will not have dangerous men thinking my son is leverage." I continued. "That ends now?" His throat tightened. "I'll pay you back?" "You will," I said, "every dollar." His eyes widened slightly. "This is not a gift, Daniel. It is a loan, structured, legal, with interest, minimal but symbolic. You're charging me interest." There was no anger in his voice, only disbelief. "Yes," and then I leaned forward slightly, "because you need to understand something." He held my gaze. "What you tried to take from me was not just money. It was agency, security, dignity." Each word landed deliberately. "So here is my revenge," I said softly. He flinched at the word. "You are going to rebuild your life the honest way. You are going to attend every therapy session. You are going to take a second job if necessary. You are going to learn restraint, patience, humility." His jaw trembled, "and every month," I continued, "you will sit at this table and hand me a check, not because I need it." I let that sink in. "But because you need to earn back the right to look me in the eye." Silence stretched between us, not hostile. Not cruel, just real. Tears formed in his eyes again, but he did not look away this time. "You're not cutting me out of your life?" he asked quietly. "No," I said. "Why?" I studied him carefully before answering. "Because losing me would make you a victim." He blinked. "And you are not a victim," I said firmly. "You are a man who made a terrible choice." His breathing steadied. "My revenge," I continued, "is that you don't get to escape what you did. You don't get dramatic exile. You don't get disownment." I leaned back in my chair. "You get accountability." The word filled the room. "You will sit across from the woman you betrayed. You will face her. You will rebuild trust piece by piece. And you will hate how long it takes." A tear slid down his cheek. "That's worse," he whispered. "Yes," I agreed softly, "it is. Because true revenge is not destruction. It is transformation that cannot be avoided." The months that followed were not easy. Daniel took a second job consulting on weekends. He sold the leased car, returned the expensive watches, moved into a smaller apartment. Every first Sunday of the month he came to the house. He placed an envelope on the table. He looked me in the eye. At first, his hands shook when he did it. But he never missed a payment, not once. Therapy changed him slowly, the arrogance softened, the defensiveness dissolved. He began speaking openly about shame, about ego, about how deeply he feared being seen as a failure. "I thought if you knew how bad it was," he admitted one afternoon, "you'd look at me differently." "I did look at you differently," I replied calmly. He winced, "But not because you were in debt." I added, "Because you chose deception over vulnerability. That distinction mattered." A year passed, then another. Trust did not magically return. It rebuilt itself in quiet ways, phone calls that weren't rushed, honest conversations about money, apologies that weren't followed by excuses. And then Christmas came again. The house was decorated the same way: golden lights, red ribbon, real candles. But this time, something was different. Daniel arrived early. He carried groceries. He hugged me tightly and did not let go first. At dinner, he poured the wine. His movements were deliberate, careful. He filled my glass first, then his, and before sitting down, he did something that made my chest tighten. He switched them on purpose, right in front of me. Then he held my gaze to family. He said quietly. There was no fear in his eyes this time, no calculation, only humility. I picked up the glass he had handed me. "To family," I echoed. We drank, and nothing happened, except something beautiful. He set his glass down and let out a small breath, almost a laugh. "I think about that night all the time," he admitted. "So do I. I can't believe you stayed." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "A mother always sees," I said gently, "and sometimes," I added, squeezing his hand lightly, "she chooses not to look away. That was my revenge." Not ruin, not punishment, but growth he could not escape. He had tried to make me powerless. Instead, I showed him what strength looked like. He had tried to take my security. Instead, I became the foundation he had to stand on while rebuilding his own. And the sweetest part, years later, when he finally paid the last installment of his debt to me, he slid the final envelope across the table and said, with steady eyes, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I smiled softly. "Oh, Daniel," I replied, "giving up would have been the easy revenge, and easy has never been my style." Christmas tree.